it took me years and years and years of many people telling me that this was abuse and that was abuse and whatever before it really started sinking in.
Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where we hate your parents for you because God knows they've done enough and they deserve it. We're going to joke about our horrible, terrible childhoods. We're going to talk about how we survived them, and we're going to share some tools that we've learned along the way. So, who are we?
Who am I? I'm Elizabeth. I am a psychotherapist and a graphic designer and a multimedia artist.
And I am Megan. I am an intuitive healer and a medical intuitive, so many types of intuitive, and an occupational therapist.
And we're cousins.
Totally missed the cue. Okay, we're gonna try that again. You ready? And
And we're cousins.
cousins.
I'm not doing it right. Okay. All right.
We are
Transparent.
unable to do that.
Okay. All right. We're still cousins. It's
We're
still a
still
fact.
cousins. We're still
So,
cousins. So this week we wanted to answer a question that, well, we've asked ourselves numerous times, but we've also heard from other people. We've heard from listeners. I've heard this from people that I talked to about the podcast. And I think it's a really, really good question for this particular type of traumatic childhood that doesn't necessarily come up with other types of traumatic childhood. And the question is, how do I know it's abuse?
deep sigh.
Yeah,
There's no easy answer, not because you weren't abused. If you're asking that question and you're listening to this, honey, like, yes. But I know that it took me years and years and years of many people telling me that this was abuse and that was abuse and whatever before it really started sinking in. And I'm still figuring out stuff. Like 2 days ago, I put together something and I was like, shit, that was way worse than I
yeah,
thought it was.
yeah.
So much more abusive. So even when you're able to finally like check the box of like, oh, yeah, it's still kind of like this discovery.
I think,
So,
it's a particularly tricky question because, first of all, when we think of child abuse, sort of the version that we have is someone either being physically abused, right, being hit or beaten up, or we think of sexual abuse, right? We sort of have these ideas in our mind of what child abuse looks like. But psychological and emotional abuse is not one that we sort of think of when we think of
mhm,
abuse.
yeah.
And we've talked before about how this type of abuse is sort of the like death by 10,000 paper cuts, right? A lot of times there's not one incident that you can talk about that is like clearly abusive, right? It's this like pattern of gaslighting, this pattern of cruelty, this pattern of emotional neglect, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's abusive. So it's a little bit tricky because it's the relationship that's abusive and not any particular incident, like one or
Yeah.
the other that's abusive, right?
Yeah. And part of it is that they train you. They only have to be really terrible a few times before you really learn that. And then they don't have to, they can control you and hurt you with very subtle things. But one of the things that I think about that's really important, like when I had to do my child abuse reporting, the education that I had to do, was that, it's like we think of physical abuse as it's like an iceberg, right? It's often the only thing that we see. And so we tend to think of that as like, oh my God, that's the most important thing. But the thing about physical abuse is that it almost never happens without the psychological and emotional abuse.
Absolutely.
That stuff's
Absolutely.
there. And I'm not saying that corporal punishment is great, but like, being spanked on the butt by someone who you don't care about and they don't care about, and it's like a function of control in the system, that's not the same as the tremendous betrayal of, I am going to hurt you so subtly and so consistency that everyone else around is going to think it looks like love, and you're going to hate yourself,
Well,
right?
and I think that's one of the keys here too, is that there are very few outward signs to anyone else. In fact, the narcissist makes your life look perfect, right? I mean,
Yes.
they are excellent, excellent, excellent spin doctors. So they can
Hmm.
take any situation and make it look like they are the best parent in the world, your family is the happiest family in the world. I mean, they can also use those powers of spin and turn against you, right? And if you cross them, they can make it look like you're the worst child in the world, right?
Yeah.
But they are very, very good at making it look like they're the perfect parent and that this is like a happy family and whatever. And I think that if you're a kid in that family, it's really hard not to internalize that and be very, very confused, right? Because
Right.
on the one hand, you're having this internal experience of feeling afraid and like bad about yourself and just all of these negative emotions, and then what's being presented to the world and what you're told and the reflection you get from people outside of your family is like, oh, what a wonderful family you have.
Yeah.
And so it's incredibly confusing. I was thinking about this topic today and like why it's so hard to know this is abuse and why it takes years after you start in therapy to even be able to like call it abuse, right?
Absolutely.
And you know, what came to me is these are the same psychological dynamics as being in a cult, right? It's just your family
Yes.
instead of a cult. And we all know
Yes.
how hard it is to get someone out of a cult, right? We know. Like we know that it takes years of therapy. We know that even if like their loved ones go into the cult and like put them in a van and drive them away because they're being so horribly abused, they will kick and scream and try to get back to the cult, right? Like we know
Yeah.
the psychological dynamics of this, and it makes it incredibly hard to admit that the cult leader or your narcissistic parent was abusive, right? There is
Yeah.
Stockholm syndrome is real, right? Like there is a way that it's this particular type of abuse makes it really, really hard to, I won't say that it's to see that it was abuse because I feel like I knew things were bad. And when I've talked to people who are in cults, it's like they knew on some level things weren't right, right? So it's not that
Mm-hmm.
you don't know it,
Yeah.
it's that you can't admit it to yourself because your sense of self has been so distorted that you don't know what's up and what's down anymore. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you get everybody else's defenses and stuff. And I think one of the things that's even more difficult about this than the cult issue is that most often when we think about cults, they're not in your own family. So it's the family itself that comes to rescue you because you've been cut out from your family. But when your
Yeah.
family's the cult,
Yeah.
like you're never
You've never
off
not been
duty.
indoctrinated. You've
Yeah.
never had a moment of your life, even like in utero, where you weren't in the cult. So you don't know any different. So not only is it like a cult, but it's a cult that you've been in since birth, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I have this theme where it's like, am I crazy? Right. So this is like, I feel something and
Yeah.
it's like, other people aren't feeling. I'm like, am I crazy? And that's forever, no matter how much therapy I do. But I realized, like, because I was doing some EMDR work with my therapist, shout out to my therapist, Deliver. And we were going through like a memory really, really young. And the thought that came up was, I am seeing things that aren't there. Like I'm feeling things that aren't reality because everybody else is like, what are you talking about? It's like I internalize that.
Yeah.
I am experiencing things that aren't real.
Yeah.
And so that itself,
Well, and you're
you don't even
told
have to be
that.
called crazy.
I think it was not a mistake that one of the narratives that I was constantly told growing up was that I was mentally ill, right? Because it's
Oh,
all of
yeah.
these, like,
Yeah.
it's all of these ways to destabilize your belief that what you're feeling is right. Trusting yourself, I mean, again, if we're looking at like a common feature of narcissistic led families and cults, it's not being able to trust yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, this cult leader feels a little like I feel a little weird when I'm around them. Like, oh, well, that's just because you're up leveling, and that's the discomfort of up leveling, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
it's the
Good things
same
are
thing,
uncomfortable. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, it's this way that anytime you express that you may be feeling uncomfortable, you're told that it's because there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And they sort of, I mean, if we're talking about flying monkeys and stuff, what they may offer you is a sense of comfort as long as you put away your
Abandon yourself.
concerns. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you, yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it becomes a mechanism where the only way to receive any sort of love or connection or comfort is to abandon yourself, is to abandon your own feelings, is to abandon your own doubts,
Yeah.
is to abandon
Yeah.
your own sense of self. And that's how you get rewarded by the narcissist or the cult leader.
Uh,
And so, of course, as a little kid, you develop that skill early on. You
yeah.
develop that self-doubt early on. It's the only thing that gets you any kind of anything that will look remotely like attachment or love. Okay, so here we are. We're in this situation where you've grown up. You don't feel like you can trust your own feelings. You don't know up from down. You don't know what's
Mm-hmm.
gaslighting and lies and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you get to the point where you really can say, like, yeah, that was abuse? That wasn't just a cold mother, or that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just a, you know, tricky family dynamics or something like that, right? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
it that we can trust as our like north on our compass to know that this was in fact abuse,
Mm-hmm.
other than our therapist telling us that, because you and I both
Yeah.
had that experience and we were like,
Yeah,
no.
totally.
My
And they're like,
therapist
for
was
the
like,
last time, like,
yeah, my
that's what I have to
therapist was
tell
like,
you.
do I need to put a billboard up in the middle of town that says Megan was abused? And I was like,
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
totally, totally. I think that I'm in the context of therapy. I think two things were very helpful for me. One was literally going through the diagnostic criteria
Hmm.
and be of PTSD, right? And that includes like what is trauma, right? And then to really kind of pick out one by one and undo some of the minimizing. And because and as a therapist, you say things like, well, you may not have felt like you were in danger, like you were going to get hurt or killed, but can you see how a different kid at that age in that situation would feel that way? And the thing that was really powerful, and I'm going to say this knowing that like more than half of the people listening to this are going to feel like they can't do, but let me tell you, I'm sure you could do it, is my therapist had me and helped me file the child abuse paperwork, not send it, but to really like write it down because when you file a report, you have to just put the facts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And when you have to get a second page, you know what I mean? Like, because
yeah,
they really only give you a little box, right?
yeah,
But they have to, you know what I mean? You have to like give them evidence. And then it's like, oh, no, no, there's like not enough room here. And like, if I
yeah.
had just like two or three sentences is enough to start an investigation. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. And it takes a while to sink in.
I think looking at the diagnostic criteria of PTSD or CPTSD for me especially
Yes,
was the one, but also looking at the diagnostic criteria for narcissism,
absolutely.
and realizing, in the diagnostic criteria, I don't remember what the number is, but it's like, here are 12 traits of narcissism. If somebody displays eight or more of them, I don't remember the numbers, but
Yeah.
then they, officially can clinically be diagnosed as a narcissist.
Yep.
And realizing that my mom hit, I think, all but one,
Yeah.
you know? So this wasn't just an unpleasant person. This wasn't just a self-centered person. This wasn't just, this was someone who had a clinical levels, right, of these symptoms.
Yeah.
That helped me a lot. I will say the other thing that helped me a lot, and I still use this tool today, and it's one that it does take some time to get discernment around,
Mm.
but really sitting with what emotions was I feeling as a kid in my house? Or
Hmm.
if you're an adult, what emotions come up for me when I have to go visit my parents or I think about going to visit my parents.
Yeah.
And if one of the primary ones is fear, that's a really good sign that it's abuse. You should not be
Yeah.
scared of being around your family, ever as a
Yeah.
little kid, but especially as an adult, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. You
Now,
should feel relief.
well, and
And I'm
because
saying that not having any idea what that feels
I have
like.
no
I
idea what that
feel
means.
like it
I
just,
hear your words. I have no clue. But
I
even
know.
people who like
That's why I
I'm
think of you as my friend. I'm like, that's
no idea.
so
Yeah,
fucked up.
family, feeling relief being around family. What does that mean? I don't even understand. Maybe that's why we can't say we're cousins at the same time because it's not like
We're
like actually admitting that you are this close to a family member is like, oh,
we're redacted. Like we should do that. And
um,
we're redacted.
anyway, but I was thinking about this. Okay, so people that I know that have dysfunctional families, so not abusive, but dysfunctional families.
Hmm.
When I've talked
Yeah.
to them about like, oh, you're going home for the holidays or, your parents are coming to visit or whatever, the emotions that come up for them are like annoyance, unpleasantness, like having to sort of like grin and bear it through some unpleasant conversations, maybe like political conversations, or maybe they're
Hmm.
angry, right?
Right.
I don't ever hear them talk about being afraid. I think fear
Yeah.
really is the key here, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of unpleasant emotions that people can feel about their dysfunctional families,
Yeah.
disappointed, right? Like, but
Yeah.
fear to me is the key. And I think that this to me became so, so apparent only when my mom was in the hospital dying. And I
Hmm.
hadn't seen her for decades. And I was a grown ass adult who had done so many years of therapy, right? And had
Yeah.
become a mental health professional myself and had, done energy healing and meditation and
Yeah.
so many things, all the things. And I get to the hospital and here I am, again, a grown woman going to see my mother who is literally like, she can't move, right? She's too ill to move. She's hooked up to IVs to a hospital bed. I knew that's what she was
Yeah.
going to look like, right? I'm a health professional. I know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I had to spend 20 minutes before I even could go into the hospital in the parking lot, just doing very basic breathing exercises to get my heart rate to like a normal place
Yeah.
and to get the fear to subside. And I
Yeah.
realized, like, oh, this isn't normal. Like, that's
Yeah.
not how you should feel. And at this point, I
No.
even knew she was a narcissist and I'd already called it abuse and all of those things. And
Yeah.
still, you know,
Yeah.
my body knew. My body knew, stay the fuck away from this woman,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And so I think if you can sit for a moment, close your eyes, and listen to what is your body saying about going to see your family. And if it's anything remotely like stay the fuck away, it's probably an abusive situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If the message you get is like, this is going to be annoying, or, ugh, I don't really want to go, or,
Yeah.
maybe not abuse. But if
Yeah.
it's fear, I think that's a
Yeah.
really good sign.
Absolutely. And like I think about sort of we have this civilized part of ourselves and we have this animal part of ourselves. And we spend a lot of time trying to manage this animal or child part of ourselves because we think it's unreasonable and not useful. But let's put it this way, like if you're walking your dog and your dog meets a person and doesn't trust them, you trust your dog, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, you may want them to behave better, but you don't like tell them, "Oh, you're full of shit. This person's fine." You're like, okay, something's up, right?
Yeah.
And we need to do that with ourselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I also want to talk about, because I think a big thing that got in my way of acknowledging that this was abuse is the age-old question, am I the narcissist?
Oh my God. Amen.
Is this me? am I the one with a mental illness? And so I
Yep.
am making things out of nothing and making this story worse than it is and
Ah,
making a huge deal out of this when really it's not that big of a deal. Am
right.
I the narcissist? So I want to talk about that because I think that that is, well, I was going to say it's a phase we all go through, but I think it's a, it's something that still pops into my mind every now and again, right? Am I the one
Yeah.
being dramatic, right? Is
Yeah.
this whole podcast that we're doing because we are both narcissists
Oh my God.
and
Well,
we
I know
just
you're not a narcissist, Megan. Who knows
but,
about me?
but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like there's this
Yeah.
anytime you sort of start to admit how bad it was to yourself, automatically what pops up is, am I making too big of a deal of this? And am I the one who's actually
Yeah.
the person with the problem? Right?
And that is a defense mechanism. The same thing with the minimizing. It couldn't have been that bad. All of those things are actually trauma responses because I know for me, it would have been incredibly dangerous for me to even have in my mind the idea that my mother wasn't anything but a loving mother because she would have noticed and she would have hurt me because
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the minute I wasn't like on board, I was the problem. I
Yeah.
needed to be fixed,
Well,
you
because
know.
you were always either the golden child or the problem. There's no in between with a narcissist, right? So you dance as fast as you can and do whatever you need to do to stay in their good graces. Because
Yeah,
the second you're out of their good graces, you are the villain. There is
yeah,
no middle ground, right?
yeah.
There is no, I love you as a person, but I don't love what you just did. That doesn't exist in a
I'm
narcissist.
sorry, what did you say? I don't understand. Wait, is there a love like that?
There is. There is. Believe it or not, you can actually disappoint someone or have a bad day
No.
or be
Let's not
mean,
even talk about it.
and the person can forgive you and there can be repair and you can and they can have the same amount of love for you throughout that whole process.
We really need to stay grounded in reality. Let's not give our listeners too high of a hope. I'm kidding. I'm joking.
But yeah, I think that like you said, the minimizing, it really wasn't that bad, or the maybe I'm the one with the problem. Maybe I'm the dramatic one that's making this, not
Mhm.
making it up, but like making too huge of a deal of this, or
Yeah.
all of those are trauma responses in and of themselves.
Hmm.
And it is
Hmm.
just more evidence that yes, this was abusive because it's sort of the old joke, but I think it's true. A narcissist would never stop and ask, am I the narcissist? Am I the problem?
Never.
Never,
Never.
right? So the fact that you're even asking that question means that you are not the
Yeah.
problem. You are not the
Yeah.
narcissist. You
Yes,
are not
because
the one making a huge deal out of something?
yes, because if you were a narcissist, you wouldn't allow that to cross your mind,
Yeah.
right? Because you are always right, you
Yeah.
know.
I think the mind fuck comes up because it's like, am I making up a story that my parent was a narcissist because I'm really the narcissist? And this
Yeah.
is my way of deflecting, right? It's such a, I mean, and that goes back to what I was saying about it being like being in a cult.
Yeah.
The recursive and iterative mind games that the narcissist plays with us and that we end up internalizing and playing with ourselves years later
Yeah. Yeah.
are really, really impressive.
Yes. And I think that this is also something that happens in the not just with a particular person, but culturally, right? Because I think what ends up happening is that so you've got two things. You've got the abuse that the narcissist does, and then they're covering their tracks, right? So they gaslight you, but then they also make sure to do all of these things that make their character look really good. And they do it specifically so that if someone speaks up about what they're not doing good, everybody else is like, well, I saw these wonderful things that they did. So what
Yeah.
happens is that there's this co-opting and mimicking of really loving things or things that are actually genuine and authentic, and they
Mhm.
use it for their own purposes. Like, for example, like now you've got narcissists talking about how they are empaths and that people are
Yes.
gaslighting them. And it's or like like a narcissist who goes into therapy, right? And they learn all of the lingo so they
Uh-huh.
can fucking run circles around you in a very sophisticated way. So
Yeah.
they're always looking for how can I look good?
Yeah.
And so they are adapting constantly and making it really difficult to, if it feels bad, you gotta listen to that. You can untangle it with a therapist or with another
Yeah.
terrible child, TM.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
you know, but yeah, and it will take a lot of untangling, but don't just start from a point of not trusting yourself. There's
Yeah,
nowhere to go.
I was gonna say start with this doesn't feel right, and
Yes.
I'm going to believe myself that something is wrong. I
Yes.
don't know what it is, but I'm going to believe myself that this situation is not good for me. I'm going to believe that I don't want to be here, that it
Mhm.
gives me like a big ick or fear or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That is really the first fundamental act of self-care that you can do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is to believe that if this situation feels wrong, that there's a reason for that. And that what you can do is pull away from the situation in some way, right? So that you can get a little perspective. Because I think another reason that it's so hard to identify this abuse is, I mean, again, going back to the cult analogy, people generally don't realize that they're in a cult until they're out of the cult. Like it takes a while for it to, oh my
Yeah.
God, that was a cult, right?
Yeah.
So it's when you're in the situation, the funhouse mirrors are everywhere and everything is so distorted. And you're so encouraged to abandon self-abandonment, right? Like not listen to that inner feeling of like, this doesn't feel right, right? You're told that's because something's wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
That your compass is off, not that there's actually something wrong, right? So it really takes, again, maybe that can be in therapy once a week, or maybe that can be just taking 2 weeks of no contact, or maybe that can be, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? But taking some time to be like, what is this feeling? Why don't I want to be around these people? Or why don't I want to be in this situation? And
Yeah.
trusting yourself. I think that's really the first thing people can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of the good parent messages. You can trust your inner voice.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to myself. Yeah.
Yeah. You said something really interesting when we were planning this episode that I liked. You said, when you grow up around narcissists who believe their own lies, how do we know that we're not doing the same? Right? How do I know that I'm not creating this elaborate story and believing it? Right?
Yes.
Because saying that you're the victim of an abuser is exactly the thing something a narcissist would say, right? Like that person was
Exactly.
abusive to me and they were horrible and poor me, right? Like
Yeah. You learn not to do that very
and you learn
quickly.
not to do that really early. So like how do you differentiate between those type of it's the part of the Darvo, right? Like narcissists like to
Yes.
always make themselves the victim, right?
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate between the sort of grandiose stories of being a victim that a narcissist tells
Mhm.
and your own story of being a victim, which you actually were? And I will say that most narcissists did experience some type of abuse themselves as kids, and that's how they became narcissists, right? But
Yes.
that's not the story they're talking about, right? That they
Right.
have walled that off and they've turned every other situation in their life into one where they're the victim, right? Even when it's
Yeah.
not true. So, how do you know the difference between like you and I saying, we were victims of child abuse
Yeah.
versus our moms constantly saying that person was horrible to me and they mistreated me when that person, wouldn't open the store after it had closed because it was closing hours and they were ready to go home or whatever, right? How do you know the difference?
Mm. Well, what's coming up right now are two things. One is context, and two is your intention. So I know that, like for me, wrestling with, what was true and what wasn't was either in therapy, right? Or like in my journal, right? So it was like, it wasn't a public forum, right?
Hmm.
Where I was telling these stories. It was very private. It was either I was listening to myself, right? I was
Hmm.
self-reflecting, which narcissists can't do, by the
Right.
way,
Yes.
or I was in a private situation with a professional. Okay. And so this was not about influencing people. This is about figuring things out inside. And the other thing is it's connected to this, which is what are my intentions, right? If I say to you, Megan, a story, is my intention to get you to call my mother and be mean to her to get revenge for me?
Right.
If you're the narcissist, yes, that is possibly right. You're
Yeah.
just trying to send out your flying monkeys. But no, like I just need to say this stuff because it's inside, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like, and you can say, like, I really wish she'd, feel as much pain as I did. That's not the same. And even the language, I wish she would feel pain. That is a self reference of my own experience and my own thoughts and feelings. They don't have any of that, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, they're so terrible, and, someone should go and do something about it. You see
Right.
that there's a real difference there, you
Yeah.
know? Is that what you were thinking about, or was there something else?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I think for me, it's that, when I tell these stories, so let's say even just on this podcast, right? We're telling these stories. And I think
Mhm.
that in my mind, where I start to gaslight myself is the idea that my mom would tell these stories of what a victim she was in all these situations. And it was very clear to me, even as a child, that that was her attempt to make a connection with someone, right?
Mhm.
It was her attempt to have a conversation with someone and have them give her, in that case, pity or come in and rescue her, right, from this horrible situation or be mad at the other person on her behalf or whatever. But it was a really fucked up bid for connection, right?
Yeah,
Is what it
yeah,
was. And my inner voice says, well, when I tell these stories, is that what I'm doing? Am I just trying to make a fucked up bid for connection? And I think that, you know, one of the things that makes me realize that that's not the case is I actually am not wanting pity or not wanting someone to like go get revenge on my behalf or anything like that. In
right.
fact, my feeling is the opposite. I feel like I don't want your pity. I don't want that. And it's this fear
Yeah.
of being perceived that you get, right? When you're a victim of
Yes.
narcissistic abuse, that you don't want someone to see you, right? You don't want someone
Yeah.
to help you
Yeah.
or, like I've realized that that's the fundamental difference is that yes, it is lovely when I meet another terrible daughter and I tell a story and we make that connection. It feels nice, right? Like to be
Yeah.
seen and understood. But my primary motivator when I do talk to people about this stuff is not to shore up my broken sense of self.
No.
In fact, it
Yes.
feels scary to tell these stories. Like it feels like
Yeah.
you know what I mean? My mother never once in her life was afraid to tell a story of how someone wronged her. Never.
Oh
She was,
my God.
you know what I mean? Like that didn't even
Wow.
enter her
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
She
I
was
didn't even
doing it
think
because
about
she
that.
was indignant and she wanted other people to also be indignant on her behalf. When I tell these stories, I am not indignant and I don't want other people to be indignant on my behalf. In fact, I'm scared of other people's responses more than anything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is another key piece of like that I am not a narcissist, right? Like, even though I
Yes.
am telling these stories where, yes, you could argue I'm the victim, I'm not doing it from a place of wanting, of that's how I'm making a connection with someone. In fact, I'm afraid that
Right.
telling the stories will drive people away,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, that really hurts. It's like it's not a game of chess. It's like you say it because you need to say it, not because if I say it this way, then this person's going to do that, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen,
And I
you
think the
know?
tricky thing is that you and I know, because we're smart enough, that the narcissistic disease might have been thinking that way, but the narcissist themselves wasn't thinking that way. They were honestly telling the story because they believed that they were the victim. They had no other narrative in their mind. They couldn't, right?
Well, yes, yes, but I do think that in those moments, a lot of times, especially if they are being particularly vindictive, they're perfectly fine with people going off and doing something on their behalf. And I think it reminds me of something that I read a while back, which just, it so resonated with me, which is that for narcissists, truth is malleable
Mm-hmm.
in a very fundamental way. And that
Yes,
they believe the story when they're saying it, but it's also,
absolutely.
they make it true.
Yeah,
They make it true by saying it that way. And I can hear myself in my mind, which is just like, well, but what about when I'm really fuzzy on the details of something? It's like, that's different.
yeah.
You're trying to kind of figure out, and things will be fuzzy because that's trauma, right?
Right.
But you are aware of the fuzziness and you are questioning yourself as you go
Mm-hmm.
along,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know what? This is the truth.
And I think that you hit a really key thing there, which is that if you are questioning yourself as you go along,
Yeah.
that is self-reflection, and that is something that a narcissist is unable to do,
Yeah.
like unable to do.
And I also need to add something to that. I need to say this to myself 10 years ago, which is, it's okay to stop questioning yourself for 5 seconds. It will
Yeah.
not turn you into a narcissist. You
Yes.
don't have to constantly question yourself to the degree that you are gaslighting yourself. That
Right.
doesn't keep you from being a narcissist.
Right.
You can
Yes.
just chill, you can chill out and trust yourself.
The over intellectualization
Oof.
and the minimizing constantly is something that took me a really, really long time to work through and to get out of that habit. Not even habit, that's not a good word for it. That like
Yeah.
that gaslighty programming. Yeah. Yeah. Let's do a mini mom off. Let's do a mini crazy mom off.
All right. Do you have a story? I have nothing at the moment, so we'll
I
see what shows
have
up.
nothing at the moment too. Were we so traumatized by this discussion that we've just
No. Oh, no, I do have a story.
okay,
Ah,
go.
okay. So, my gosh. So, shout out to my new friend Heather, who is also a terrible daughter and has just
Woohoo!
started listening to the pod.
Welcome
Hello.
to the club, Heather.
She texted me because she's been listening to the podcast that she had a nightmare about my mom. And I'm sure she's not the only one, but she doesn't know my mom from anything other than just listening to the episodes. And so just hearing like two or three stories from the crazy mom off can get a person to incorporate that into their nightmares. Yeah, I think that person was abusive and fucking crazy. Oh, hats off to me.
I will tell a similar story from sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, but like I remember reading, oh my God, what was the name of the prequel to Silence of the Lambs? What book was that? Was it Manhunter? Was that the
Yeah,
prequel? Okay.
I love that. Yeah.
So Manhunter talked about was it was about Hannibal Lecter, and there was a big portion of the book that was about like how did Hannibal Lecter become Hannibal Lecter, right? Like how did he become this, incredibly intelligent cannibal therapist person, right? And so it was, I think he was raised by, I can't remember his parents or his grandparents, but there were some flashback stories
Yes.
to his childhood.
Mhm.
And I'm reading the book and I understand because I have a degree in English literature that the particular narrative device they were using was a flashback scene that was supposed to be some exposition to tell you how this character became the
Mhm.
way they were. I
Mhm.
understood that what I was reading in these sections was supposed to explain why the character became the way they were. But when I was reading it, my minimizing part of my brain was like, well, that's not that bad. Because what they were describing was not much worse than what I had experienced. It was worse.
Yes.
I will say it wasn't
Yes.
like, but it was not much worse. And
Yes.
so I was like, well, that doesn't seem that bad. Like, that's what turned him into a psychopathic killer. Like, this book is badly written. Like,
And cannibal. Because,
and
you can be a
cannibal.
psychopathic killer and not be a cannibal.
It's true.
You know what I mean?
And so
Wow.
I realized as I was reading that the cognitive dissonance that was happening in my brain that, like, yes, clearly this was enough abuse to turn him into a psychopathic cannibal killer. I was
Uh-huh.
the one who was minimizing it. It wasn't that it was badly written or inaccurate. Like,
Oh my
my
God.
brain was so invested in not believing that what happened to me was abuse that it was
Yes.
like, that doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah. I've heard worse. Not in my own life, but
Like,
because
I
that
mean,
also wasn't
that kind
abuse.
of thing, like a similar thing happened to me as a kid. And look at me, I'm fine. I'm not a psychopathic cannibalistic killer.
Can we talk at some point about the Hannibal Lecter universe? Because I don't know if you've seen the television show or anything like that, but like there is so much to talk about. There's
Oh,
so
really?
much to
I
talk
haven't.
about.
I know there is a TV show. I
Oh,
haven't watched it.
it is amazing.
I
It's
have,
amazing.
like, sometimes I am all in when shows are about that kind of thing, like
Yes.
the type of abuse. Like, I am all in for any kind of cult show. I am all
Mhm.
in for any kind of show about, like, North Korea, what it's like to live there. Like, I am all in. But for some reason, when it's like, there's certain ones, it must be that it's hitting too close to home in some way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can't watch them. I can't watch them. They're
Yeah.
too, instead of being fascinating, they make me dissociate, you
Sure.
know?
Sure, sure, sure.
So
Yeah,
I
I hear
think
you.
that Hannibal Lecter, I mean, I hate to say it, but like, I think that Hannibal Lecter and my mom were probably a little too close
Oh,
in their
Jesus.
particular type of pathology. And I can't. It just, I start to dissociate and I don't find it enjoyable.
You know what? I have to say, like, I think, it's because Hannibal is, first of all, he's an excellent chef. And
Oh
he's also,
no.
that is one of the most
And
wonderful
he's a
things.
painter.
Well, yeah, yeah, yes. He is an art and he's an estate, right?
Yeah.
He's an elitist. And
Like I
and
said, I think there's too many
absolutely,
similarities.
absolutely. But I will say, like, one of the wonderful things about because the show is completely unhinged, is they'll actually like have these really like soft, kind of like gothic Nigella sequences of him, cooking and arranging food and stuff like that. It's apparently you're not going to watch it, but
Yeah.
it's
Sorry. I'm gonna opt out of that
no,
one. Too
no.
close to home. All right. So now, can you tell me about a tool you used this week that helped you get through this shitstorm that we
Yes.
call modern reality?
Yes. Okay. So what I have started doing is instead of getting up in the morning and scrolling, I'm doing some very gentle movement. It's kind of a form of improvisational movement where I'm with my body and I simply I may start out gently stretching, right? But I'll breathe and I will just keep my attention in my body, and my body will tell me how it wants to move. And it doesn't have to be with music or anything like that. But what I find is that I do gradually end up like stretching and relaxing a lot of parts of my body, a lot of muscles. But it's this dance creating for myself. I have no idea what it's going to be or what it looks like. And it's really all about this good feeling in my body
Yeah.
because it feels so good yeah, for the body to move the way it needs to in the moment. And then I just feel so much more myself.
Yeah.
And it makes it in that moment so much easier to go into like all of these other like self-care tools that I have. Yeah, so it's just been really great.
I love that. So a couple years ago when I really started looking at like the neuroimmune connection and trying to
Oh,
heal my own stuff, and one of the things that I came across was this idea of, or came up with, sort of came across slash came up with, was this idea of making a playlist of songs that just make you really happy, right? Like a lot of them were from when I was a teenager, or just songs that you hear and you love them, that you just want to get up and dance to them and move around. And then just taking 5 minutes and dancing, and but not dancing like I'm in a club, into
Right.
curb,
Yes.
just moving my body,
Yeah.
sort of like yeah, like sort of like you're describing. Like it doesn't have to, sometimes it ends up looking a little bit like a dance move, and sometimes it just ends up looking like shaking. And a lot of this
Mhm.
came from, sort of this idea that music helps our brains make the happy chemicals, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, shaking, like TRE, trauma release exercises, or, any kind of shaking also helps our nervous system reset. So I was like, well, what if I sort
Mhm.
of combine the two? So it sounds very similar. It is incredibly helpful when I can remember to do it every day, which I don't, but I do it only for 5 minutes. I just put on the playlist. So I love that. I think there's something
Cool.
really, really powerful about just moving your body in whatever way it
Yeah.
wants to, and listening to your body and not judging it, and not, like I do this in
Yeah.
the privacy of my own bedroom with the drapes closed, right? Like I don't, this
Yes.
isn't something I'm doing out in public, and just really giving yourself permission to do that.
Yeah. And that's another reason that says that you're not a narcissist because narcissists don't do anything without an audience.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I read a post on social media about, somebody was talking about like comfort shows, right? Like, and like The Good Place or Ted Lasso or whatever, and these shows that you just rewatch when things are sort of dark in your life or dark in the world, right? And that how nice it is,
Mm,
and trying to avoid shows that are
mm,
too triggering to your nervous system. And
yeah.
somebody else commented, or maybe it was a different post I saw, but somebody else commented about, before they go to sleep each night, they, in their mind, create like this really lovely, like low stress fairy tale story, right? It doesn't have to be a fairy tale, but just a
Mm,
narrative, right? That they have.
mm.
And people were like, oh, I didn't know anyone else did that. I have this ongoing narrative that I've had for years. And every night as I'm like drifting to sleep, I like continue the story, and it's very low stress and it's happy, and nothing bad
Oh,
happens in the story. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
oh,
this
yeah.
very like sweet story. And so I started trying to do that, not necessarily before I've gone to bed, but just like almost as like a type of meditation practice during the day, is
Mm,
I'll just start
mhm,
constructing some story where like nothing bad happens. It's just a
mm,
story of somebody having a nice experience. Maybe it's me, maybe it's
mm.
someone else, right? It's just a story of like a calm, nice, beautiful day. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Monk and Robot books,
Oh my God.
that I
Yes.
know I recommended to you at some point, but just this like really lovely story where nothing really bad happens and people are all going to
Yeah.
be okay. And,
Yeah.
in the story, people have moments of like understanding each other and feeling seen and having good experiences and making connections with each other and feeling
Hmm.
joy, right? So I've sort of
Yeah.
just started telling myself these stories, these little stories, like little fairy tale
Mm,
stories where just good
mm.
things happen, you know?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Mm,
So
mm. That's a good idea. I like it.
thanks.
Okay. All right. So that's it for today. So this is the last episode of season two. We're very excited. We've got two seasons under our belt. Don't worry, we will be back. I mean, we're definitely coming back. We're just going to take a little break, partly because we want to model for you guys taking care of yourself when you're creating something or just, doing something. So we don't want to like run ourselves ragged, trying to, profess some kind of, self-care kind of a thing. And we're going to be planning and yeah, we just get to rest and figure out our next step. We will still be posting on Instagram because I can't stop creating memes.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Can't stop, won't stop. Absolutely. So our Instagram handle is at terrible daughter pod. And also send us emails. Like we want to hear how you're doing. Oh, give us some ideas for season three. Again, continue to send us crazy mom off stories. We're going to get to that one of these days. Maybe next year we'll do March Madness, which is a bracket. So email us at h2bterrible@gmail.com. Yeah, and we love you guys. You guys are amazing. I know you're probably refusing to take that in. I know that I would. But if you're listening,
I'm
if you've
I'm right
got,
here and I can't take it in. And I know you're not even talking to me, but I still can't take it in.
yeah, it's like, yeah. Oh, thank you for reminding me because, and also, we have said, send us an email. And I know you're probably thinking, well, they're saying everybody else but me. But I am actually talking to you, like you. Okay. So send us an email. So, like Megan said, we were either the scapegoat or the golden child, right? We were either the princess or the villain. And let me tell you something. I mean, we know how shitty being the princess is. Like, it's really not that great. But there's freedom in being the villain, and there is a sense of empowerment. And you know what? We've been through too much abuse to ever hurt anybody else the way that narcissists have hurt us. So we can be the villain and kind of not hurt anybody. So, if being your authentic self means being the villain, just do it.
Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our new podcast on your favorite podcast app. Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content. And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.